Welcome everyone to another Maine SBDC webinar. We are here for part 2 of our financial projections series with Maine SBDC at CEI Business Advisor Rainer Large. My name is Kelsey Reardon, and I'm sure you've gotten far too many emails from me already, but you will keep getting them. You'll get those reminders, and all of my follow-up emails will go out afterwards with the links and the slides and any other resources we mentioned. So if for some reason you did not receive the slides and the recording from last week's session, do let me know and I'll make sure you have all of that. Like I said before, you can respond to any email that I have ever sent and it will end up in the same place. So feel free to send any questions you have right on over. Also, we'll be using the chat feature, so any questions you have during today's presentation, feel free to just plug right in the bottom. Also, we're a smallish working group, so feel free to introduce yourself. Rainer's pretty good about checking in on what's going on in the chat and asking people to let us know where they are, or some fun poll question. So feel free to chat in there. I'm trying to think if there was anything else, but otherwise, I think we're ready to go. So I'll pass it over to Rainer.
Perfect. Thanks, Kelsey. And thank you all for attending. I know it's a short holiday week, so I'll try to keep it brief and to the point. And if you are watching the recording later from home, certainly no judgment. Understand that there are other obligations in a week like this. I think we covered all this. So today we're going to be talking about pulling your income statement from QuickBooks into Excel, what that looks like, how to go through that process. We'll talk a little bit about formatting, and then we'll build out some of the initial kind of analysis and lay the groundwork for next week, in which we're going to talk about the theory, the basics of projections, and really dive into kind of building from where you are now to where you want to be looking ahead. So just a quick kind of summary of what we talked about last time. There are 3 financial statements: the income statement, the balance sheet, and the cash flow. The income statement being the operating side of your business, the actual performance over a period of time. The balance sheet being a reflection of what your business is, the assets, the liabilities, and the difference between those two, your equity. And then the cash flow just showing the cash in and out on those other 2 statements and how it flows forward. As far as projections go, our main focus is on the operating statement or the income statement, because that's where you spend most of your time. It's how you're performing in your business. It's how you're using your assets to generate revenue, cover your costs, and hopefully end up with some left over in your pocket. So this is kind of a breakdown of what the income statement is, and we'll look at yours specifically today, which will be a lot more interesting. But it's about the income generated, your total sales or revenue in a period of time. And then remember, the expenses are broken down into 2 pieces: the cost of goods, which are those direct costs, which we'll look at as a % of your sales, and your overhead, which more or less shouldn't change. It's kind of the same month in and month out, year in and year out. And that's your rent, your insurance, your utilities, administrative, payroll, professional fees, all of those costs that are somewhat related to your revenue, but not directly related. And then the idea with your net income is that's what it's ever left over, right? It's your revenue, should cover your costs, you should have your overhead, and then what's your actual profit? What do you put to your bottom line that you can keep for yourself or reinvest into your balance sheet? So go ahead and open your QuickBooks if you haven't already. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. And through this process, like I said, and like Kelsey pointed out, we have a smaller group today. I'll try to cover it in a timely fashion, but if I'm going too quickly or you have questions or I lose you, please interrupt me, ask me to slow down, ask me to clarify. So in your QuickBooks on the left side, you should see something called Reports. Or if you have a desktop version of QuickBooks, it'll be one of the top menus. If you click Reports, you can see your business overview, one of which is your balance sheet, which you can see, is starred. And then we have what's called a profit and loss by month. The profit and loss is Another name for the income statement. It's your profit and your loss, hopefully not loss. And so when you click on profit and loss, it should show up as probably a single column with your chart of accounts on the left side. Your chart of accounts being your revenue lines, your cost of goods lines, and your expense lines, whatever it is for your company. Now, if you scroll up a little bit, you'll see that there's a menu at the top with this report, and it allows you to input some cells. So we're going to change these input cells. Now, I want to go back a few years. So I want to change this first report period. I'm going to change it to custom, and I'm going to start January 1st, 2018, going back to 2018. And then I'm going to make it through the end of last month. So hopefully you've closed the books for October, and we have October financial data in there reconciled against your bank account. And so we're going to pull whatever this is, 50, 60 months of information. And I want this display columns to be set to months, not total. So I change that to months. And then for the accounting method, one other change, I'm going to change it to accrual. Now, if you remember the difference between cash and accrual accounting, they're both account for the income statement, your revenue, your expenses, but one does it in a slightly altered fashion because of timing. The accrual method spreads those things and allows us to compare period to period a little more easily. So I want to do that. Then I'm going to click Run Report. It should look something like this, right? So at the top, I have those cells that I just changed. And now I have my income, my cost of goods, your chart of accounts on that left side. And then every single month from January 1st, 2018 through continued on. It's a lot of data, and don't worry, we're going to kind of dig into it. So to pull this into Excel, at the top right over here, there's a little kind of, I guess, a U or a file basket with an up arrow. And you're going to click on that, and you're going to click Export to Excel. And it should prompt you with a place to save it. You can put it right on your desktop. You can put it in a file. Just don't put it in your recycle bin quite yet. So click on that, and that should pull it into Excel. And give me a moment. Any questions so far? Have everybody with me to the point that we're pulling that information into Excel? It would be the same thing for the desktop, yes. Sorry, Kirsten, do you want to ask me, I'm not sure. So we say where. Yeah, good question. So hold on. So it's on the right side at the top. Let me share my screen.
Hey, Rainer, can you just make sure that you read the question so that anybody who's watching the recording knows that you are pulling into the Excel button again?
Yeah, so we're reviewing where the Excel button is. And so you see at the top, you have your report, the information pulled. And on the right side, there's a button that is export to Excel. It's right next to the printer button or the email button. So it's at the top right on the far side. So you have to scroll over if the report goes to the right. Were you able to identify that, Kirsten? The button that says Excel should work as well. The desktop version, I'm trying to remember where it was. One moment, let me see if I can find a desktop version to compare to.
Rainer, can I jump in?
Yes, please.
All right, so I have the desktop version. And so I don't want to share my screen. I can if people need me to, but I'm looking at profit and loss, and then just below where it says profit and loss, there's a bar and you can customize the report, comment, memorize, print, email. So then that's where you want to go to Excel. And just below that, for anyone who wasn't able to do it, there's show columns, and that's where you can break it down by month.
Yeah. I think I found it.
You want me to share my screen? I can share my screen.
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
So there's also, so I found an older version of Excel and then grabbed a snapshot of it, or a QuickBooks.
Right.
But it's at the top. So you have the customized report, which allows you to make those changes that we just discussed. And then one of the options at the very top is this Excel, and you can create new worksheets. So thanks, Eli, and thanks everybody else for your patience as well. So that should get us to a point where we look at something that ends up looking like this. So now I'm in Excel, and I have a massive amount of data that I'm looking at. Does everybody see this? And does everybody have something similar that they're looking at? And I'll go slowly, but so you can tab between the screen sharing and your own, or if you have two screens, even better. But so what we're going to do is we're going to try to make this information a little more manageable. So the first thing I want to do is check my chat. Make sure everybody's on board. Okay. So I'm going to select all of the data, the numerical data right now. And I'm just going to do that by clicking in the upper left and then dragging over. There's a lot of information in here that is just redundant or clutters the screen. So I'm going to change the text a little bit. So what I want to do is I'm going to go up here to this comma. There's a comma style rather than accounting. It's still numerical, but it removes that dollar sign. Then I'm going to use this decrease decimal button and do that twice to remove the cents place, right? I'm really only interested in dollars, and I know they're dollars, so I don't have to have all the dollar signs. So already I'm feeling a little more comfortable just without some of that data cluttering it up. Now I'm going to scroll back over to the left, the furthest over to my January 2018 data. I'm going to look at these 12 months. So I'm going to go from January to December. And to the right of my December column, I'm going to select 3. Click on the alphabet letter up at the top, N, O, or P, and highlight those 3. I'm going to insert new columns here. And the reason I'm doing that is I just want to separate out my first year of data. And I want to identify and kind of look at this. So then I'm going to write in here 2018, right? That's my goal, is to say, okay, let's start combining some of this information into a more manageable way that I can review it. So one of the equations we're going to talk about, and I'll paste this into the chat once it's all complete, is the sum equation, right? So I'm going to do plus or equals the sum, open parentheses, which is just saying, okay, I'm going to add some cells together. And anything that I include at this point is going to be added together. So I'm going to go to the left and highlight the 12 cells of January through December 2018, close parentheses, and hit enter. And all that's doing is it's saying, okay, add the 12 cells to the left of this equation, which is important at a later time. So we'll get back to it. Now, if I do that, that's good. It gets me to a starting place. But what if, what if we get to a cell that's empty, that doesn't have any information? And this is where it gets kind of fun. So now I want to say, okay, if the sum of those things is greater than 0, I want that equation. And if it's false, I'm going to leave it blank. I do 2 parentheses. I'll walk you through this again, so don't panic quite yet. I know that's the thing. But an if statement in Excel allows me to say, okay, I want 2 possible solutions depending on some data validation, if it meets the requirements of what I'm asking for. So just from a logic perspective, what I want to know is, okay, if there's nothing to the left of this equation, I want to ignore it. I just want to, I don't want to populate it with 0. I don't want to have an equation there. I just want it to be blank. So that's that question of, okay, if it's greater than 0, then I want the equation, the sum of that information. And if it's not, if the logic test is false, I I can put something in there, a placeholder. So if you use 2 quote marks, it's a blank space. Not even a blank space, not a 0, just empty, which is nice because then if I copy and paste this equation, I can paste it wherever I want, and I don't get a bunch of cluttered data. It zeroes it out if there's nothing to the left of it. So that's kind of fun for me because, again, it's a reference, right? So the equation of sum is just saying I'm going to sum the equation, the 12 cells to the left. Now, because it's not fixed, anytime I place that equation, it's summing to the left. So I can copy and paste that equation anywhere, and it will replace that data, and it will update it. So now I know, okay, this is what my whole year of 2018 looked like. And I'm going to put this into the chat so you can just see kind of what it looks like in the information. It's also in the slideshow, which will be sent around later if you want to reference back. So what if, this is also something interesting. So what if the sum is a less than 0? Not 0, not empty, but less than 0. This equation, as it's written currently, would populate a negative or would populate 0 rather than a negative number. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that the absolute value of what I'm looking for is greater than 0. So I put a little ABS, open parentheses and close parentheses around that. So now if this information is, if my total is negative 65, the absolute value of that sum is less than 0, and it still gives me the information I want. And I can copy and paste this equation, and it will give me the same information across the board. I don't want to overwrite my data though. So I'm just going to go back. Then I'm going to do something else. One more thing before we end with our total column. And that's I'm going to change the formatting, right? So I could go in and I could make each one of these things the same format that it was before. And that takes time, right? To go in and put a little underline and put a little bold, because the copy and paste of an equation doesn't copy and paste format. Or what I can do is I can highlight the formatting that I want, and I can click this little button, the Format Painter, in the upper left. And that copies the format, not the equations, not the information, just the format. And if I click there, it automatically does all of that for me, which is nice because now I have a nice clean 2018 data sheet. I know, okay, this was my performance in 2018, but I just want to look at it as a year. I have that. With me so far. Not the most interesting information I know, but we'll get to the analysis part, which is more interesting as we go. So then I want something else. I'm going to add another column in here. Sorry. Yes, absolutely. So the ABS part. Now remember, so I have my if statement. Yeah, the two screens helps. I'll copy and paste the ABS in here. And these, so the way an equation works in Excel is we have like some nesting statements, right? So the overall statement is an if statement, saying if it meets this criteria, this, and if it does not meet this criteria, this, right? So we have those two pieces. Now we want the first part of the if to be, okay, what is the logic statement? And we basically want the logic statement to say, if the information that is 12 cells to the left contains information, contains values, whether or not they're negative or positive, then we want to see those values. We want to analyze them together as an entire year. Okay, the second parentheses, yep, absolutely. So the parentheses are a way of kind of isolating those nesting things. So the sum is the interior equation, if you will, and the ABS has parentheses around that sum to say, okay, if the sum negative or positive has value, then we want to see that value, the same sum, or we just want that zero, null value. So then we're going to add another column, and this is why we put 3 here, that is percent of revenue, right? So When we talked last week, we talked about kind of identifying cost of goods as a percent of revenue. The idea that if I sell a product for $1 and it costs me 80 cents to make, then that relationship between those two changes depending on what my projected revenue is. So as I change my revenue, my costs go up and vice versa. So we want to see, looking historically, what are our costs as a percent of revenue? And that equation is relatively simple. We want to say, okay, so if, or I'm not even going to use an if statement yet. So we're just saying the line to the left divided by your total income line, your revenue line. So for me, and I'll change this to percentage so we can look at it. My service business is 21.3% of my total income. Right? So it's saying, okay, the one cell to the left divided by your total income is a percent. If I copy and paste this, I'm going to get a value error. And the reason for that is because this equation is saying divide the cell to the left by the cell to the left and 3 or 4 down, right? It does the same thing the next one down, which is a problem, right? Because now it's no longer looking at my total income line, it's looking at the one below. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix that reference. And to do that, I'm going to put a little dollar sign in the equation next to the thing that I want to fix. So I want to fix it in the 8th row. Now I don't want to fix the one to the left because I want that to change as I go down, but I want to fix the total income point. So for me, it's the 8th row. I'm going to put a dollar sign there. Now in my original equation, it doesn't change anything because it was already referencing that. But if I copy and paste that down 1, now it has a different value. So I know my retail sales are 47.8% of my income. And my wholesale sales are 30.9, which means my total income is 100% of my income. That's good. That's what I want it to be. That makes sense. Now, if I do it in a blank space, I get a value error, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an if statement, but a specific one. And it's going to be if error. And it's going to be the same logic, right? If there's an error, I want the value, same equation that I've already used, cell to the left divided by my total income. And the logic here is if there's an error, what output should there be? And I'm going to use the same thing, 2 quotes, close parentheses. Now that doesn't change anything for the equations I already have, but now if there's an error line, it doesn't populate that information. It just zeroes it out. So I can copy and paste this equation all the way down, and I see all my data, which is good, right? That's what I want it to be. Now I'm actually going to take this one step further, and you can do this or not, depending on the length of your chart of accounts, depending on how much information you're looking at. But some of this information I might not find necessarily useful. You know, dues and subscriptions, great example. This is less than 0.1%. You know, do I want to see that information? If I want to hide information for any reason, I want to isolate just information that's what I determine to be important, I can use another if statement. And what I would do here is I would say if the value to the left, you know, whatever the total is for that year, is greater than whatever the value that I think is material, right? For me, I'm going to say $2,000, right? So if that total amounts more than $2,000, then I want this equation. I want to see that percent of revenue. But if it's less than $2,000, I'm just going to zero it out, right? Now that disappears, right? It still exists for the other equations where it matches, where the value is over 2,000. But if I copy and paste that, it begins to hide some data. And for me, that might be useful. Again, if you have a really long chart of accounts, if you're scrolling up and down, and you just want to really focus on the information that you find useful, you can use that nested if statement to say, okay, what value isn't material for me? Am I going to waste time trying to identify and what values do I want to focus on. So then I'm going to do the same thing with the format painter. Make sure I get my format over here. It will return it back to zeros and ones, but I can simply go up and make this a percentage again, and it keeps the formatting that I want. So now I have my total column for 2018. I've got my percent of revenue column for 2018. I have this blank column, which what I'm going to do is just remove the formatting from by copy and pasting a blank cell, making that thin, but just a way for me mentally to kind of separate, okay, this is 2018 data, and looking forward, what do I have next? So now what I can do is I can go out to December 2019, insert 3 cells or 3 rows. I can go to December 2020, insert 3 rows. And then I have October over here. And I'm going to leave that for now. But because I made all of these equations reference equations that reference the cells to the left, the 12 cells to the left, or the immediate cell to the left in the percent of revenue, I can copy this whole row, or this whole column, and I can paste it right here. So now I have 2019, and you'll see that this sums the 12 cells to the left. My percent of revenue column is now referencing 2019 total data. I can copy and paste this information at the end of 2020. And I have that in place. Now I have 2020 data. And I can copy and paste this over here. Now, keep in mind that because this is the 12 cells to the left, I want to leave space for November and December. I'm going to actually paste it over here and make sure that this is capturing this data, which it is. Any questions so far? Yes, sorry, I'm just seeing this question. So Eli asked, does the dollar sign fix the cell? Yes, it fixes so either the column or the row that you're referencing. Excuse me. So, in our case, we are fixing only row 8, right, in the situation that I'm looking at here, which is helpful because if I put this in front of the N as well as the 8, then that would fix it to N8 exactly, which wouldn't be a problem for 2018. But if I put it in 2019, what you'll see is that it is now still referencing the 2018 data. So yes, it's fixed to the row 8, but it's also fixed to column N. I don't want it fixed to column N. I want it fixed one column over and always row 8. So I'm only using the dollar sign to fix that row, not fix the column as well. That answer your question? Any other questions as we're looking at this? So now what I have, which is going to be more useful for what we're looking to next week, is I can hide the month-to-month stuff. It's for my long-term projections. The seasonality is important, but I only really need 1, maybe 2 years to identify seasonality. But for my kind of the momentum that my business has and the inertia, it's more important to look more long-term, especially with COVID interrupting 2020 and 2021 the way it did. Now we have 2 years of pre-COVID information. We have 2020, which was a mess, and then we have 2021. And we can look at this and say, okay, how are we doing? Right? So where are my trend lines? My service is going up every year. That's pretty nice, right? I gained, 12,000 in business year to year, and then another 3,000. So not quite as much in 2020, but we can look at this. Now we have all of that data that you pulled. So, thousands of cells, every dollar that came in and out of your business for the last 4 years. And we have it next to each other. We have 3 years next to each other. We have this year to date by month. And we're going to look forward as well. We're going to say, okay, what do the next 12 months look like for us? Now, we might want to put something in place for November and December, just so our 2021 has some, basis of reality. And we can do that a couple different ways, right? So you could plug in data if you'd like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy October and paste it here. Now, what I want to do here is keep the equations and remove the raw data. So for me, I know that I have 3 income lines. And this is an equation that sums them. And this is one of the benefits of QuickBooks, is it has these equations in place already for this month. I want to take out this information. And I want to take out all of my expense information that isn't an equation. So I'm keeping the equations as they are, because we only want to project the raw data, and we want the QuickBooks to do as much work as possible for us. So now I have November, and I can copy and paste this over into December. So we can manually go in and enter, best guess your information, or you can wait until you close November and enter actual information or repull this. Or what we can do, which I'm going to do just for the sake of discussion today, is I'm going to say, you know what? I'm pretty much in line with where I was last year. I expect my November and December to be similar. I'm just going to copy and paste November and December over into these columns. And my equations are all in place. It will autofill that data. I'll say, okay, I'm on par to do $59,000 in my bottom line, $366,000 in sales. Last year I did 361 and 58 to the bottom line, so a little bit ahead. Yep. So, one of the questions just popped in to hide months and get rid of raw data. So again, to hide months, what you do is you click on the alphabet associated with the column, and you can click and drag to do multiple. And if you right click on those columns, you can cut, you can copy, but all I want to do is hide. I want to keep the information there so that the equations still work and the references work. And I can look if I need to, but it allows me to kind of ignore it for a period of time. Now, to get rid of the raw data, I am deleting that outright, because what I did was I copied it. So if I had October, I'm actually looking over here. So, what I look at when I see this, Excel does a great thing, and QuickBooks does a great thing in kind of identifying the equations that it has in place. And you can also see at the top where an equation is and where raw data is. So when you pull it out of QuickBooks, it fills the raw data. It says this is the exact amount of sales that I had in service, the exact amount that I had in retail, the exact amount that I had wholesale. But it does give me this equation, which sums the 3 above, which is useful to keep, because when we project and we look forward, we're going to have 25,000 in service and 50,000 in retail and 10,000 in wholesale. In that equation, we don't have to write that equation. We don't have to mess with that equation. It's already done the work for us, so let it continue. So all I'm doing is I'm looking at, okay, in this column, my base column, I'm going to delete the information that I'm going to replace with my projections. And I'm keeping the information, the equations that I want to auto-calculate for me. So what I want to do is I'm going to make this January 2022, right? And I have this raw data, the equations, the format, the functionality built out already. I want February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Now I'm looking forward and I'm saying, okay, what does my next year look like? And we'll play with it in next week, and I'll really dig into this. But for now, I'm just, again, laying that foundation, building that template. And because I have it, and because we've already done the work, I'm going to copy and paste my total column my percent of revenue column at the end. So this is what my next year is, right? Right now it's blank. We're going to fill that out. You know, the world of opportunity ahead of us, but this is the basis of it. This is what it could look like, and we're going to build to it. So now I have my year-to-date data. You can leave this blank for now, the November, December if you want, or you can plug and play. What I want you to do is I want you to have 3 columns between historic data, end of 2021, and the next year's projections. Column 1, column 2, column 3. And again, I use these kind of skinny columns to separate out the data and focus on. And this is going to be assumption 1. This is going to be assumption 2. And this is going to be assumption. And this is where we're going to spend the vast majority of our time for the next 2 classes in these 3 columns. So assumption 1, what we want to put in there is we want to identify the logic that we're going to come up with. Now, if you remember last class, we talked about the 4 types of projections, right? It's contract, which is like for your lease, for your insurance, something that is written in place and easy to predict. We know what a contract is. We've signed that paperwork, we have it on file. There is no prediction there, it just is what it is. So that's the base, you know, that's the easiest way to project. The second is historic. And the historic part is where all of this information that we've pulled really goes into it. If you're showing a totals column, you can just delete that. Yeah, that's a good question. Apologize. Some of us have a totals column on the right for all the information that we pulled. You can just highlight that and delete that because we built our own totals columns year by year. So historic information is that analysis where we're going to look historically. We're going to say, what are those trend lines? And you're going to spend some time between now and next class doing exactly that. Right? So if I look at this information and I see my retail sales are going up $5,000 or $6,000 a year consistently for the last 4 years, then I know, okay, this is increasing, right? And my assumption 1 column is that explanation, saying, okay, this is the reason or the logic behind my assumptions. We'll get into the assumptions themselves in more detail next time, but that first assumption is what I want you to work on from now until next class. To say, okay, is it a contract? Is it a historical trend that you're identifying? Is it relative, right? That's that cost of goods. You can see my direct wages was 30% back in 2018 and has been 35% of my revenue for the last 3 years. Now, if I'm looking at that, then that's easy for me to predict, right? I can say that's a 3-year percent of revenue. It's just my note to tell myself that's what it is. It's a relative projection that's going to relate to my revenue line. I want to look at the last 3 years. Best guess, it's probably going to be 35% unless I do something differently. So we have contract, we have historical trend, we have relation, right? Payroll taxes would be another one. All of your cost of goods are likely relational projections. And then we have estimate, owner estimate, right? That's always kind of the baseline. So for something like the revenue, owner estimate might come into play. You have big plans for next year. You want to add a new revenue line. You're going to really focus on developing one product. Then you might want to say, yeah, you know, I did 66,000, 70, 81, 81, but you know, I'm going to drive service. That's the whole focal point of my business. I have better, you know, return on energy that I spend there. I have better clients. I really like my customers that I spend time with and work my service. So I'm going to make that, you know, 100,000. You know, yes, it's been flat the last 2 or 3 years, but that's an owner estimate. So that's that zero base, the least reliable, to be perfectly honest, but it's legitimate, right? To say, okay, you know, this is my focal point. This is the change that I want to make. So again, that first column, we're saying, okay, what is your logic behind this? And you should be able to look at this very easily. And again, this is your business. This is information that you have, that you've been putting in. This is your day in and day out. It's a different format than you're probably used to looking at, but you know your business. So you could be looking at this and you know exactly what you spend in these areas or how much energy you expend. And you should be able to quickly say, okay, you pick one, office supplies, you know, right around 62, 63, 6,500. It's an average, right? The 4-year average. And that's my note to myself. I'm just going to average the last 4 years. I'm not going to try to predict, you know, geez, did I change my card stock? Is that going to change? You know, it's 2% of my sales. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it. I just want to average the last 4 years. That's what I'm writing in this assumption column. So go through these, make your assumptions, write them down. The second column, and I'll show you, we'll work through this next class. This is where we're going to put in the numerical value. It could be a percent of revenue. You know, if I want to have, you know, the 3-year average for my percent of revenue, I can use an equation to do that. Oops. It would help if I selected the right cell. But, you know, so we're going to use the second column to identify those numerical values associated with your first assumption. And then the third assumption is going to be seasonality, right? If there's a heavy seasonality to your business. And we'll spend some time next week walking through that process and what that looks like. And we're going to use a prior year's seasonality to project the future seasonality. All of this information to the right is going to be equations that we build off of those 3 inputs, those 3 assumptions, which allows us to then change those assumptions and see how they impact our bottom line, right? So, you know, that's kind of where the fun part is for us, is right now, these assumptions are just identifying trend lines, identifying performance to date. And then we're going to say, okay, what if? What if we change that revenue assumption? What if we change that expense assumption? What if we change your cost of goods performance as a percent of revenue? How does that affect you? How does that strengthen your business? And where is your time and energy best spent to create the strongest business possible? So I did want to leave some time for questions at the end. Again, this recording will be sent out. I will also double check my PowerPoint. I think I include, I have some style guide things. You know, yes, so I do include some Excel equations, and we'll dig into this again next class. If you have any questions on this, I'm happy to help. Excel is a wonderful tool. If you have a question on how to do something or if something can be done, I almost guarantee it can be done. The question just is how, and we can kind of discover that together. How did I create the 2020 columns? I'll show that again in just a second. I do walk through annual calculations using the sum as well as the if statement, and then identify the format painter. We walk through the percent of revenue calculations, and I give examples of the equations there. So again, all of this will be emailed to you, so you can kind of absorb it on your own time. And then the 3 assumptions that we're going to talk about. So let me switch back to the Excel and I can answer that question. So the equation was, how did I create the 2022 columns? So I'll walk through that again. So we just delete this and we can start from scratch. And again, so we've covered all the information that I intended to cover today. So if you're if you're happy with that and you're comfortable, have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll see you next week. Please keep in mind, so, and sorry, I will get to your question in just a second, Katie, but just want to cover some administrative things before we dive in again. Next week, we do have 2 possible classes. We have the continuation of this class, which is talking about building out those projections through cost of goods through the expenses. That is on Tuesday. On Thursday, there is an optional class you can sign up for, which we just dive into the revenue side. I know that's a big question mark for a lot of either newer companies or even existing companies looking to kind of differentiate, add different product lines or pivot. And projecting revenues is one of the most difficult things to do in a business. So we'll dig into that very specifically on Thursday if you're around. If you're not around and you're interested in that, sign up anyway. You get emailed the recording as well as the PowerPoint slide that you can reference in your own time. So little plug there. So to swing back to the question, how do we create 2022 data? What I do there is I'm really mirroring it based on the prior year or your chart of accounts, right? So I'm going to copy any month from a prior period, and a month specifically because that's the same format that I'm going to use going forward. So if I paste that data to the right of my assumption columns in my, my blank space looking forward, right? It'll paste that same reference. It'll paste the raw data that QuickBooks has provided me through this report, and it will paste these equations, which are summing, they're all sum equations or simple equations, but they give me my net operating income. That's my goal here, is to keep those equations. Now, I can't delete everything and just start from scratch and start putting in the equations and saying, okay, my total income is, these 3 rows. My total cost of goods is these 4 rows. My gross profit is my income less my cost of goods. But, anytime I start doing that, changing equations, trying to see them manually, there's the potential for human error, right? It happens all the time. I miss a cell. I don't see exactly what I'm looking for. So a workaround for that is when I copy and paste this information over, I want to keep those equations as much as I can. So I can identify, just by looking up here at the top in this little area, I can identify what is a raw piece of information, what is raw data, just a number, right? And that I want to delete. And you'll notice the equations all change. My total income changes, my gross profit changes, and my net operating income changes when I remove that. And that's great. That's what I want to keep those equations for. And so I'm going to go through, and every time I see a numerical value, I'm going to delete it. And every time I see an equation equals sum, a number minus another number, I'm going to leave that. I want those reference points. I want those equations. So I can go through pretty quickly, and I can create, a column that has all of the equations but none of the raw data. So that's my January, and I'm copying that, and I can paste it, however many times I need to get 12, right? I need 12 months. I want 12 columns of that raw data, the monthly templates, if you will. I'm going to go in and just make sure, you start with January, and it goes through December. So now I have all that data in. Perfect. And like we did at the beginning, where we summed the information to the left, we have our total column, we have our percent of revenue column. I'm going to copy and paste that data now to the left of my new template, right? And I'll just change that to 2022. I could type that out. And so now I have, 12 months side by side. I've got the total and the percent of revenue, which will become important when I'm double checking and looking at it next week and building that out. So did that help, Katie? Were you able to kind of follow through that? Any other questions? Anything else? And again, your homework for next class is to just kind of look at this assumption 1 column. Right? This is just a logic state, really. It's saying, okay, what are the trends I'm seeing? How do I want to predict this? It doesn't have to be an equation. It Doesn't have to be anything special. It can just be shorthand, or, you know, the word none if you don't think there's going to be anything in that expense. Whatever you need, that when we go in next week, you can say, okay, how do I do this? How do I use this logic statement to project forward? And that's really where we'll dig in and have the most fun, I think, personally. But you know, I'll leave it to you. So, yeah. Okay. Well, you know, have a great Thanksgiving. And of course, you know, I'm available tomorrow as well as Monday and Tuesday of next week if you have specific questions or concerns that come up. Certainly available to help and answer those. So feel free to reach out, and if not, enjoy your holiday.